All right, are we ready to get started, everybody? Good afternoon. I am Dr. Angela Clark-Taylor. I am the Executive Director of the Flora Stone Mather Center for Women. And the very first thing I want to do before I ask our fabulous panelists, thank you all for being here today, to introduce yourselves, I would like to embarrass some of our postdoctoral fellows and scholars at the university. If you were involved with organizing this event, can you please stand? Thank you all so much for this idea and putting it together. Okay, sorry about that, but you needed to be recognized. Well, I am so happy to be moderating today. We are going to give everybody the opportunity to introduce themselves. I always think it's the best way to hear about you, what you want us to hear about you. So our very first question is, can you tell us about yourself? What is your current role, and how would you describe yourself? And I'm going to pass my mic over to Dr. Cook-Bailey.
Hi, I'm Jessica Cook-Bailey. I am an assistant professor in population and quantitative health sciences in the School of Medicine. I have been in that role for 3.5 years. Prior to that, I was an instructor here at Case Western, and prior to that, I was a postdoc. So I'm delighted to be here to do this event. What were the questions? What do I want you to know about myself, about me? I have 2 kids, a 7-year-old little girl in 1st grade and a 7-month-old little boy. They're so mumuch fun. I have 2 miniature dachshunds that are my other babies. They're a lot of fun too. And that's kind of my what am I doing when I'm not at work? When I'm at work, I study mostly genetics of age-related eye diseases, so primarily glaucoma. We're working on trying to better understand how genetics contribute to glaucoma and how we might be able to develop risk profiles for individuals so that we can figure out who's going to get disease sooner and intervene sooner and preserve vision. How would I describe myself? You want like a... I think telling you what I would do if I wasn't in research might be kind of telling. I think if I wasn't in research, I would want to be an event planner. I love stuff like this, bringing people together, making things look pretty, baking, all of that stuff. And I like to use that kind of part of my brain whenever I'm not doing work. Yeah, is that good? Cool. Okay.
Hi, I'm Radhika Ateet. I'm a professor of biology here. I have been here 17 years, so I've been here a while. And before I was here, I've been I'm an assistant professor to professor product of Case Western. I'm the first woman in my department to have done that in 37 years. So that was a big achievement, milestone for my department also. Before that, I was a postdoc, just like many of you, and I did my postdoc at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and then I finished out my second tail end of my postdoc at Case before I crossed the street and took on my faculty job. Something to say about myself, I would say, the way I describe myself, at least the labels I try to put on myself, I say first and foremost, I'm a mentor, and I'm in this business because I really like to bring young people along the process of thinking about science. I'm also a scientist in research, and the other label I'd put myself on is I'm a tinkerer and I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always trying to find new ideas to work with and new things to think about and bring in new teams. I'm probably a natural team builder, and I love working in teams and making new teams coming out of nowhere and finding new people to help us. And I'm mostly driven by curiosity of biological processes. So it takes a lot of work to find new people to help us with things. So I would say being an extrovert is a very big asset in my business because most of us in the sciences are introverts. So that's also very helpful. And my current role is mostly to guide young people. I teach classes in evolution and development, in developmental biology, and I run a lab with about 15 people in it at any given time. I have 7 or 8 undergrads, 5 or 6 graduate students, technicians. I'm always looking for postdocs. So if any of you want to change fields, come find me. So.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Elian Irani, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Nursing here at Case, and I'm a former Case postdoc. So I am a mom of 2 boys. They're 5 and 7. They keep me busy while I'm not at work, and so that's why while I'm here, I try to use up my time wisely to be able to catch up on all the things that I have. I'm originally from Lebanon. This will be my 11th year in the US, and I'm still adjusting. I think that will be a lifelong process.
Yeah, I forgot to mention my children because they're like not at my workspace, so I don't even think about them here.
And so another thing about myself is that I'm a very caring individual. I love to help out anywhere I am, whether it's at work, at home. I truly worry about everyone around me, and sometimes it makes me forget about worrying about myself. But yeah, so I guess, I'm happy to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kenny. I'm an assistant professor in the pathology department here. And I've been here for roughly 2.5 years. So to go back a little bit in my history, I grew up in Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area. I did my postdoc in Boston in virology at Harvard. And actually it took me 7 years. And after that, I switched fields to do my postdoc at the University of Washington in the Department of Genome Sciences. And I was there for roughly 25 years. And then, the last 2.5 years, so I did essentially a national search for faculty positions roughly 3.5 years ago, and that landed me here. And I, as I kind of described to you, I switched fields a couple of times. And I think that's kind of been nice in that it's kind of given me an interdisciplinary view on things. I think I'm, jack of all trades, master of none. But no, I think that's part of what I really like about science, being able to kind of like have all these tools and all these different curiosities and to be able to explore them. My kind of topic that I study is relatively vague. It's just studying protein variants at like at massive scales with these multiplex genetic assays. And it can be applied to a lot of different directions. Some of the work we're doing is kind of SARS-CoV-2 related now, but also there's clinical genetics and precision genomics kind of stuff. So there's a lot of kind of fun topics. In terms of, myself, I think if it was 6 months ago, I said my main identity is as a scientist. I think, it is kind of the thing with this job. I think it does kind of take a lot of your kind of time and kind of, efforts of a share of your life. But as of 3 months ago, I just had I now have a 3-month-old. So along there, I also have an identity of a parent. So.
No, I'm sorry. I just realized I didn't tell you what I do here at Case. It's like I forgot about this identity. So I, like I said, I'm an assistant professor at the School of Nursing, and I'm currently mostly doing research, but also teaching in the undergraduate program. In my research, I focus on interpersonal relationships, specifically the relationship between older adults with chronic illness and their caregivers or care partners, to see how they can collaborate on managing both of their health and well-being. And more recently, I've been focusing a little bit on health disparities, specifically for family caregivers, trying to understand their cardiovascular risk as well as their sleep health. And so that's what I do here at Case.
Yes, there we go. Hi, Daniel Lamar. I'm in the Department of Music. Like Professor Ateet, I got here 17 years ago, which is crazy. Many committees. Yes, that too. And my kids have nothing to do with that. Right. So I'm a professor in the music department, and I work on film, animation, popular music. I am a person of many hats. That is what I hear a lot lately. So I direct the Center for Popular Music Studies, which has a staff of 0, meaning me, and then we make great use of the administrative support staff in the music department when I can. I'm also an associate dean in the College of Arts and Sciences. I am the dean of very long titles, which is associate dean for interdisciplinary initiatives and international affairs, which means I am the conduit and point person for working with programs, centers on this campus that are part of the College of Arts and Sciences. So that could be the Gelfand STEM Center, that could be the Center for Popular Music Studies, the Tibetan Studies Center, the et cetera, the Baker Nord Center for the Humanities, which I'm also currently the interim director of. And that's not all the hats. But the other reason I'm here is I'm also the advisor for 7 working dissertations at the moment. We've got, I think 5 of them are going to finish this fall. So if you see me, I'm going to look very busy or very like, which dissertation am I reading right now? But going to, I think maybe what Radhika said, the mentoring thing is really, really, really important to me. And we can talk more about that as we get along. But that may be for me one of the biggest roles that I see, not just for me, but the thing that I hope to try to convey to my colleagues, the importance of working with students, working with postdocs, working with other faculty, actually, because mentoring isn't just for someone who may be younger or less experienced than you. You can actually mentor people who are even more experienced or older than you. You may have to be more finessed about it, but it can sometimes be very helpful. So there you go.
All so much. I already feel like I've learned a lot about you, and I understand even more why you were selected to serve in this panel. I really want to speak to what you said at the end there, Dan, about mentorship. A great colleague of mine, actually an assistant dean at the University of Redlands, who was from Japan, said that the Japanese translation for mentor is someone who's lived a life before you, so that anybody could be a mentor to anyone at any time. And so I really second that. So today's panel is about work-life balance, right? So I've heard a lot already about work balance and life balance and work-life balance. So I also want to invite folks that are here in the audience to come up to this microphone if you have a question that comes up, something you hear here, and we'll stop and we'll divert to your question. If not, I've got a slew in front of me I'm happy to answer. Okay, so let's move into our next question. And I feel like what we can do from here on out is that as folks feel kind of compelled to answer, and if everybody wants to, we can absolutely do that, but don't feel like you have to. Our second question is, how would you describe your career trajectory, for example, from graduate student to postdoc to your current position? I think some of you touched on this a little bit.
I feel like I haven't touched on this a lot. So I would say I followed a mostly traditional path in terms of my career. So I graduated with my bachelor's degree in nursing back home in Lebanon in 2007. And then soon after that, when I began practicing in the clinical setting, I started being annoyed by some of the things that happened, I guess I should say, and I didn't feel like it was the best way to be caring for patients. So I started having questions, but then along the way, I was still in contact with some of the faculty, and they were encouraging me to get my PhD, mostly to go back and teach at my home institution. And so I came here, I practiced for a little bit just to get used to the clinical environment in the United States, and I completed my dissertation. And then soon after that, it just I fell in love more with research as opposed to clinical practice. And then it led me naturally to having a postdoc and then following on that with a faculty position. I would say the first year I started on the tenure track, it was summer of 2020 is when I joined, and I had a lot of conversations with myself about whether this is truly what I wanted to do, because we were mostly working from home and it was very hard to keep track of time and work-life balance. I think I'm a little over that now, and I do realize the importance of the work that I do and my passion and being able to leverage those in my life.
So, I mean, I touched a little bit on my kind of career trajectory, but I'll go into a little bit more of the details of it. So, I think it's a combination of having certain interests that kind of defined it, but also being somewhat aimless and flexible. So, I think many of you in the room already have that initial thing of knowing which direction you want to go into, right? And I think, whether it's science or what other kind of study. And for me, it was, virology really early on, because as an undergraduate, I learned about Nipah virus, which is a scary, virus that's in Southeast Asia, and, very captivating to an undergraduate, first learning how research works, right? So that kind of led me down that path. I had an inherent interest in kind of molecular biology, and I think that's been a constant in my kind of scientific career as well. But from there, I think things have been really flexible and kind of aimless due to the two-body problem. So my wife was also a graduate student in the same program as me. She graduated a little bit earlier than me. And then she took a postdoc in the same city, which then moved to Seattle, which necessitated me finding a job there. It wasn't easy. I actually applied to 5 or 6 different postdocs, one of them being my dream postdoc, which rejected me. Eventually found something that was still, again, not in my field at all, right? But it was, what ended up being a common thread is I used molecular genetics, so essentially studying protein variants to study HIV in my PhD. And then essentially in my postdoc was essentially developing kind of recombinant DNA technologies to do that 1,000 times faster, right? So, I think it was one of those things where I didn't necessarily, this wasn't a plan that I had, kind of concocted, dreamed up. It just turned out to be that way. And I think it ended up being a pretty useful combination, because then I could take two disparate fields and kind of combine them into my whole quiver of kind of knowledge and techniques available to me. I would actually say, so I never had a dream of necessarily being a PI per se. I kind of, when I did my postdoc, I kind of went the postdoc route of, it was a good department. They really supported postdocs applying for fellowships and things. So I got I applied for 5 or 6 different fellowships, got one, right? And that kind of set me down a little bit further down, the potential academic path, or kept more options open. There were a lot of very bleak moments in my postdoc. There were times I definitely wanted to quit. And it, I guess things ended up working okay. Probably the most defining thing for me actually being in this position now is, towards the end of my postdoc, apply for a career transition award through the NIID. Now, this was completely on my own idea, right? It has nothing to do with my postdoctoral advisor. Ended up getting that. It actually came with a 1-year timer of you have to find a faculty job in 1 year to actually, claim this award. But I think it actually worked out. I ended up applying for, 100 or 110 different positions, had, 10, maybe 10 Skype interviews, 10 real interviews, 1 offer in the end, although maybe if I left it dragging out a little bit longer, it would have been another 1 or 2. But yeah, that was literally what kind of led me to this position. Now, if I didn't get that, I think life would have also been perfectly fine, right? I would have been perfectly situated to be in some biotech or something in Seattle. I'd probably make double the amount of money, but I would have a lot less of the kind of creative flexibility and that I enjoy now, right? So, I think, that's a relatively long-winded explanation, but, I think that is kind of my journey of, there is the science that I was interested in, a certain facet of science that I was interested in, but then from there, kind of following just the opportunities that were presented to me and kind of trying to make the most of them. And this is where I ended up with that.
You can hear me? I think the thing that you've heard from both these speakers so far is interesting, is that you have to keep an open mind going into your training. And I try to tell people coming into training is that it's not just about the subject area that you're studying per se that matters the most. I would say what matters the most is the training that you're going to get and the mentor that you're working with. And if you if you have some preconceived notions that you want to go to grad school to only work with this one person in the entire world on this one subject area, then I think you might be disappointed if they're not taking students that year, or they don't have money that year, or they are on sabbatical that year. You have no idea, right? And so that happened to me. And when I went to grad school, I was one of those people where I was like, oh, I'm going to go to this institution to work in this subject area, and I'm going to work with one of those 3 people, but at least one of those 3 people will be taking a graduate student that year. So I get there, all good. And then 0 out of the 3 people were taking students that year. And that was my host department. And they were like, well, you can go to these other departments and find someone. Why don't you go over there? And I was like, wait, that's like in a different school. They were like, fine. So they shipped me off. Like, I went to the Department of Developmental Biology, and they sent me to the Department of Neuroscience. And the first person who I really enjoyed was a cancer biology person. And I was absolutely dead set on not working in cancer biology, because I was like, okay, no. We're going to go work on genetics, and we're going to work on environment, and we're going to go work on teratology. No, I ended up in neuroscience in her lab. She was holy terror, but probably one of the finest scientists I've ever met. I remember her almost every day. There are lots of obnoxious things that come out of my mouth, but then I have to filter it. But when they are coming out of my mouth, they're totally her, because she trained me to be a certain kind of scientist in every, like, visibly, intellectually. And I think her mark on me left me in a completely different way of thinking about science. And then from there, I went on to postdoc, very different style personality of a mentor, but equally effective. And then there too, I was gung-ho, ready to go with that woman because she was working in limb development. I was like, yeah, limb development, that's all I want to work on. I get there, and she says, oh, limb development, I have a lot of people working on limb development, but since you worked in skin biology, you should come work in the skin project. It's really perfect. You should totally take this on. And I'm like, no, I came here to work on limb biology. Why are you changing? I worked in skin biology. And I think you just have to be really open-minded, because science can just throw you just have to follow it for what it is. And if you're just a curious person, you'll be happy doing whatever. And I think it doesn't matter where you do it, how you do it. We're not set up like that. And I think if you get boxed in a certain way, thinking that you can only do this because that's what you're trained to do, you will quickly become antiquated. And that's not what you're set up, because your career arc is a very, very long time, even though unfortunately, I'm sitting next to junior people, but I just want to let the junior people even know, tenure, no tenure, it's just the first 6 years of your life. Nobody cares like how long it took you to get anywhere, but you have another 30 years staring you down. So what is your strategy for training yourself to do the work that you will do 30 years from now? That we don't even know what this place is going to look like 30 years from now. So I think training broadly and training with the people who you think will have the most impact on you can be really helpful. And don't worry if things change on you while you're training. It's okay. It'll work out.
More folks can add, but so as somebody who studies career development of women in higher education, one of the things I'm hearing folks talk about is what they call planned happenstance. Has anybody heard of that before? Right. And so it sounds like this nice, fun term that's just sort of like things happen and if you plan a little, but it really is this more idea of mapping. What are the areas and specialties you're developing? What are the overlap? What are the opportunities? Right. And making decisions as they come. And so I am so impressed by how you've all sort of developed this. And also, I really want to speak to what you said. I think as scientists, right, it might be a natural sort of evolution, like of thinking about your profession, right, of having sort of that focus as well. Does anybody want to add before the next question? Yeah.
Something you just said, Angela, reminded me of something that I told myself, and then I tell my postdoc now. It's building our CVs so that we are competitive for any, position that we might want to take. So anything we might be interested in. I would not encourage people to only focus on academia. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but I think anything that you might be interested in, try to get experience in those spaces, so that if for instance you apply to 100 jobs and the one that you get isn't what you thought, having experience that could make you more qualified than the next person can be really helpful. Even like doing things like this, being part of, postdoc organization, that type of thing. The way that you write about that when you're applying for positions will help you kind of navigate those potentially different spaces than maybe what you thought you were going to go into or what your mentors thought you were going to go into. I think having those kind of, like Kenny said, being like a jack of all trades, like it's important to have experience in different spaces.
Absolutely.
I just want to follow up on that because I think that's very, very, very important to not close oneself off to possibilities, and I think the happenstance idea is very, very important. A lot of the work I have done comes from basically intercepting a phone message, intercepting in that I caught it and no one was going to hear it. This is back when there were phone messages on machines. Yeah, that goes back a ways. But had I not written it down, thought, oh, this sounds interesting, I would have not gotten 5 years of experience working in the record industry. And that means I'm one of the only people who writes about popular music in my field, who not only worked in the record industry, but has production credits, doing exactly what I do, which is being a music historian. And it's like, oh, yeah, that doesn't really sound interesting. I'm like, no, I pursued it. It was part-time, and then it became full-time, and I was going to continue doing it full-time while I pursued another degree, and then I got my first job. So you just never know where those things are going to go. And if it's not the right thing, then that's great. You have an experience and you move on from it. But the idea, and I'm fairly certain my mentors were probably not crazy about me doing a job while I was taking classes still, which is why I did not tell them. It's the way it goes. And those are the decisions we have to make for ourselves for what we think is going to serve us best. And I don't want to be, I'm a mentor to many people and have many graduate students, and I know they've all had to do this, which is we have to make decisions that are ultimately right for us. And what our mentors want for us may not be what is best for us. Many people will project what they think is the right thing. And the thing I always try to tell the folks I work with is, here. I don't say this is what I think is right. It's like, here are the pluses and minuses of the things we've talked about. Here are the things I see that you've laid out. You ultimately have to make that decision. I'm not going to make the decision for someone, which is, of course, the worst thing, because people really want to be told what to do. But I'll speak for myself, but I think I can speak for all of us. We don't know it any better than anybody else. In fact, you probably know much better than we do what feels right. And that answer isn't always necessarily going to come up right away. It probably will definitely not come up in the meeting you're having with your mentor or your advisor, because that's more of a pressure thing. Sometimes you have to sit back and take it away for a little while. But it's like, oh, that really sounds like the right thing. It's like, maybe not. But it's really important to be in touch with yourself about what you think feels right. Because ultimately you have to live with that thing that you decided to do. And it's like, oh, my mentor really wanted me to do this. Yeah, but they're going to go another direction ultimately, right? You're going to be going somewhere else, and you will be the one who has to either benefit from it or maybe not benefit from it so much. So just be in touch with what you think about these things as you're going forward. And do take advantage of those opportunities when they happen to show up on your voicemail or drop into your lap somehow.
Thank you so much. We have a question from the audience.
Hi, we have a question from Russell. He's on the live stream, and he says, how do you make time for hobbies? I have hobbies in art and writing that aren't related to my research, but I find myself never being able to devote the necessary time to them and other life things that I enjoy. Every time I try and set aside time, I feel guilty for not working on my research, especially given that I'm a PhD student and researcher without an established career.
You'll never stop feeling guilty. So it partially is come to terms with the fact that it's okay to feel bad about that, because I still do. Even if I said I'm never going to write again, which I don't think is the case, I'm going to feel like I should be writing till the day I die, because that has been drilled into me at least from high school onward, that I should be actively trying to do that work. So one big step, I think, is to be okay with, having time for me to do what I want to do is actually a good thing, and actually will help me be a better researcher, writer, whatever it is that your work is about. So I would say that's one part of it.
I agree. And I would say, I saw a meme the other day that said something about, guilt as a manageable emotion or a manageable feeling. And I think that if we take guilt and like really look at it that way and say, I'm having this guilt, and why am I having this? Let me think about the factors at play here. Well, what is making me feel guilty? Well, is it my mentor, or is it the lack of work I think I'm going to get done? What is it, right? And like quantify it. Think about it logically, and then make the time. Like take the time and space. And I think that the guilt will maybe it's always going to be there, but I think if you can think about it as just another feeling and not give it so much energy, then that's okay. I think also for me, what I have begun to recognize as a faculty member, and I didn't have space for this really when I was a postdoc or grad student, or I didn't make space for this. I'm realizing that the more fun things that I do and things that I do that aren't necessarily related to work, the more of my best self I can bring to my work. So when I say like, my cup is full from being with my family or hanging out with friends or doing, I don't really have hobbies, but I don't know, doing whatever, I like to read non-work stuff. And so like if I can just take a couple hours on a weekend and read, and then spend a couple hours with my family, taking time away from work, I think is super important to then come at it with like a fresh perspective. And so I would challenge you, Russell, to kind of flip the script on the guilt and the hobbies and schedule your time, make space for it, and then you go from there. See how you feel after a week or a month, and quantify it. And if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't look right, if you don't think you're getting enough done, okay, well then what changes can you make? But having other things besides work, it's very, very important for our mental health, and I would say even our productivity.
I completely agree. As someone who studies the effect of like negative emotions and stress on our own health, I think I would feel guilty of not taking enough care of myself as an individual, and not as much guilty for not being able to work more, if that makes sense. I would say one thing that I learned from when I was a student all the way to being a postdoc and then now is that any habits you start developing would carry over, and then it would be very difficult for you to change and like challenge yourself to change. So I would highly recommend starting that process of changing your outlook on feeling guilty or not about work now, so that it's not too late. And then to the point about like positive feelings, I think we often tend to underestimate how much like positive experiences can influence the way we work. Getting that positive energy is sometimes very helpful for you to be maybe more efficient at what you do, improving your interactions with people around you at work, at home, or anywhere you are.
I just wanted to add something to that. I actually take a very proactive approach to this. So I teach a class in my department that is Introduction to Being a Graduate Student in the Biological Sciences. And I think that kind of, it translates to postdoc world also really easily. There I tell mostly first year graduate students that they actually, I insist that they go find a hobby and that they have to find another arena in which to go and find joy and excellence. And then those skills they bring back to being a graduate student in whichever field they want to pursue it in. Because what that forces your brain to do is that you go and obsess about something else altogether. You might get there faster than you will in your graduate program in biological sciences or whichever. And that'll just keep you going. And you will have an opportunity to network possibly with a whole different group of people. So I bring this up all the time with my first year grad students in my lab. in this classroom, and I say that to all of you out there too, that go find a hobby and go pursue it at a really high level, whatever level you can, but keep going. Don't give that up, because that's the place where you might get joy on a more regular basis than pipetting per se in my business, because joy comes very infrequently in my line of work. It's mostly like a lot of head banging and other problem solving before you get to the joy moment. So I feel that that's really important. I myself took that advice as an undergrad. I came to ceramics, and then in grad school, I found myself in a ceramic studio because I was like, that's all like time I have. I'm just going to pursue. And it was great. I was there among non-science people and non-other people, and it really kept me going those days when I wanted to quit. But I had friends who always told me I had to repeat, would you like burgers and fries with that 100 times? And if I made a mistake, I had to go back and pipette. So if you want to quit in grad school or in postdoc years, that's totally okay. But I would say don't let hobbies, you should have an other space. But you don't, people hire, when you go to be hired for any job, I hope people have the vision to hire people, not projects. So you need that to be part of that person. And so you don't sound like a project.
I think something that kind of goes in with this and what we were talking about in the prior question is identity, and having your own identity outside of your project, your lab, your title. And again, I really, wish I had been more forward thinking as a grad student and as a postdoc. I feel like this is something that I've just come to in the last few years, but just kind of knowing who you are and knowing your worth beyond your productivity. That's really important. So you were saying on those hard days, what kept you going, right? Well, if you put everything that you have into your work, what is left for you and for anything else, in your life? And so then if things start going badly in your science and your work, they will. And they always will, right? You need to have something else that brings you happiness and joy, because you can't always expect that to come from work. I feel very, very strongly that figuring out who you are is really, really important, and something that, you should make time and space for.
Please go ahead, Kenny, and then we'll take another question.
So, I have a couple kind of thoughts or examples on this. So, this is also something I thought about a little bit in my postdoc. I'm kind of weird in that I like to quantitate a lot of things in my life. So one of the things I did, despite the fact that we don't stamp in and stamp out in terms of our job, I still kept a really detailed log of all the hours I worked my postdoc. Again, for my own fun of data analysis, but I thought one thing that it allowed me to do is I'm on average working 50 hours a day. I can totally give I don't need to devote any more of my life to it because I'm already putting in my time, right? So in terms of if this is a guilt of just you feel that there's always something to do, I think in some ways, I think that helped me, because quantitating the fact that I was already working, essentially the kind of, expected 40 hours, but even more on top of that, it felt like it gave me a little bit more of the authority to be like, all right, I've already done what I need to do for my job, what I'm expected to do for my job. I can, take whatever time I need for my own stuff. Another thing in regards to this topic is, I think people have essentially mentioned it. Some of these hobbies and things, they can be either negate some of the bad, or they can kind of provide some good, right? So I guess in terms of, my experience, if I don't necessarily have the time to kind of wind down or whatever, I'm probably going to get burned out in a couple of days, right? And then essentially everything I do is going to be that much slower, that much less high quality, right? So I think having that, I guess that's the whole negating the bad thing, having those hobbies, that time you take to yourself to allow yourself to kind of stay in a more kind of peak steady state. I think that's a worthy investment, both for you and again also for the people you're working with, right? And then finally, in terms of the providing the good, I guess one hobby I've always had is kind of going to live music ever since high school. And I personally every single time, now that I'm 37, 38, go to a live show now, it's always oh, this is really late. I don't know how much I want to stay up. But once I'm there and I actually see the people, performing and like being really good at what they're doing, like it gives me inspiration to try to be like a better scientist for the next week, right? So I think there's also like these hobbies can also like add these like extra things of value in doing them.
Dan, do you want to add before our next question? All right, we have one more audience question.
So we have a question from the live stream from Anki, and he says, would it be a better option staying in academics or shifting to industry? That's more of a personal choice, but what would be kind of the pros and cons of each?
I mean, I think this is going to be really yeah, and I think this is going to be really field specific, right? So, I guess I'll kind of take it from my field, where it's more kind of biomedical research. I think in this field, like I think it really is kind of saturated at that academic level, right? Again, like I don't know, I wasn't the greatest candidate at any of my steps, but I was a pretty good one, and even then, like it was still a very tough road, right? So I think this comes back to the whole like being practical and flexible thing, and I think that's also why I was trying to say that like even for me, like if that career transition award didn't hit and I was taking that last year of my postdoc to look for jobs, I think that would have been the right thing to do, right? But again, like I think it's also going to be very, very person specific. I mean, I guess for me, I think I'm definitely of the opinion that like, for example, the money isn't as big of a deal for me. So I think having enough to be comfortable, start a family, all that kind of stuff, that's important. I also don't necessarily need to be making the 200,000 or whatever. But there are people that do want to live in Seattle or San Francisco or Los Angeles or whatever, where you need that money to actually live there. So yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on what you value, right? And to me, I think the kind of creative flexibility that comes with this job is what I end up valuing a little bit more than that. But that being said, I think these are, like all valid options. And I don't know, like I don't know if you even need to make this strict dichotomy of do you go this way or that way. I think maybe you could just leave everything generally open and kind of keep exploring multiple ideas and just see what ends up kind of making the cut.
I think when you start off grad school or postdoc, it's really hard to imagine that you could ever get a faculty job for some people. For some people, I think that choice is pretty clear. But I would say someone like me, it wasn't clear when I was in grad school. I was pretty much dead set never to be a PI after the end of grad school because I saw how hard my PI worked. And I was like, I'm not really sure I have it in me to, like, that stamina to do what she does. And now I'm doing it at like 1/3 of what she was probably pulling off. But I think going back to what we were saying before about being flexible and open, that is not at the expense of vision. You need to have a vision for yourself. And what is that vision? And it's not to say that that vision is for all time, but at some point towards the like second, third year of your postdoc, you need to start kind of thinking about vision in how you imagine yourself and what you imagine yourself as. And it doesn't have to be very detailed per se, but some boundaries around that vision would be helpful so that you can then start putting some bricks in place to make that vision happen, right? So what my vision was, I knew from a younger time, like even in grad school, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. And so without telling my advisor, I went and did these teaching classes at the evenings because I didn't want her to find out and freak out. So I was like, fine. So I did that on the side because I knew so I just thought I should at least go check out if I'm good at this thing, like teaching thing. But it was helpful to get that training in grad school because then I said, okay, even as a postdoc, I'm going to keep some concepts going. But you have to have that vision somewhere or go work on that vision if you don't have one. And so if you have a vision of being a teacher scholar, start working on that teacher part. If the scholarship will come naturally because you're already in an academic setting. If you imagine yourself being an industry entrepreneur type person, go get those skills while you're a postdoc. And I think then the chips will fall. You'll just have to apply for a bunch of things. I don't think you can a priori, most people probably can't make that choice. Often it ends up being that third or fourth year or fifth year in your postdoc where people will pull you aside and say, hey, so what are you thinking about doing next? And I would say, as much as you want to take a lot of opportunities that come your way and listen to yourself, which is absolutely right on, don't discount what some of your mentors say, because they have seen hundreds of people come and go. If they say you're one of those rare people that you have what it takes to have that job, you should apply for it, I wouldn't discount that altogether, even if it's not something you were imagining yourself doing, because you might surprise yourself when you go to that interview and you totally rock it and you're like, yeah, I got this. That you can't, sometimes you're so young and so freaked out, you don't have enough confidence to believe in yourself. You might be struggling with all that. But those people in the mentoring ranks sometimes we can see that, right? When we see an amazing student, we're like, yeah, they're going to be fabulous. They're going to be just fine. So you have to also balance it with that. But I think you need to have vision for yourself first.
I wasn't trying to say that
no,
you shouldn't listen, but on the contrary, I mean,
right.
because things have changed so much that it is now sort of incumbent on us to really help people say, yes, you are the person who is perfect for this, or this, where it used to be like, oh yeah, go look for a job, you'll find something. Right. That's no longer the case, right? And it's not, or that is, when I say something, I mean an academic job, a traditional academic job. That's really no longer the case certainly not in the humanities, I assume in the sciences as well. So your mentor is going to be great for helping you figure out what is the right thing. And that's where their expertise is really going to become very, very useful, because they may have ideas about, I've seen the work you've done here. Have you thought about this? And suddenly a whole new world can open up. You just may not have thought about before.
Before we take our next question, I'm just going to say very quickly, as one of the folks up here who did decide, I guess, to take a staff role, the irony is I study higher ed, so my industry is higher education. So it's really one and the same in some ways. But looking at what offers you the opportunity to do the work you want to do and thinking about that more broadly, I have a lot more resources to do the research I want to do here as an executive director than I would as an assistant professor, right? So just something else to think about. We have another audience question.
Hi, thanks so much for everything you've said so far. Having just finished a year of job season, and successful as of yesterday, I'm happy to be where I am. But I just wanted to share that, last week even I was thinking, oh, maybe now I have to apply for these other jobs, non-tenure track outside of academia. And now I'm thinking the opposite. So it seems kind of like you have to be prepared for everything and ready to switch at any time. And I think having a family and having a preference for location makes that very difficult. So I don't know if you could share more about, I appreciate Dr. Maitreya hearing about some of those things that you experienced. I wondered more if you could give sort of encouragement for how can you be ready to shift at a moment's notice?
Great question.
I think it's really, I'm also part of a two-body problem, and I was in New York City for my postdoc. I was having my dream life, and I had the pleasure or the mistake of dating somebody on a tenure track job. And that's a bad situation, because now you had a postdoc dating somebody who has the job, and you're like, but you have to, luckily I didn't have preconceived notions about which part of the country I wanted to live in. I just had very clear ideas of where I did not want to live in. So south of the Mason-Dixon line was a non-starter. Many parts of the country were non-starters, so that was a problem, right? I'm a two-body problem, plus many parts of the country are not available to me. So I think then when I started looking for a job, luckily my spouse and I had the opportunity to say, okay, we'll both go on the market, even though he already had a tenure track job. And I was like, wow, this is true love, right? Like if somebody's willing to give up their... And so I think even after you get your job, it's not for life, right? Things will change. You might decide to give up on that job. You might decide to move different part of the country. You have to be okay with that. And I think there's no way to say, first of all, congratulations on the job. Congratulations. And so, yeah, I think you have to roll with the punches. You have to be comfortable in saying that no life is a long time and lots of changes will come. And so if you're open to embracing change, yeah, just don't get attached to anything.
I often tell people that people ask how I get to Cleveland, and I say, well, it's that and they're not non-academics will ask me this, and I'll say, well, it's like the military. You go where they go, you go where the job is, you go where they tell you, essentially, because there aren't that many options. So the other element of that is sometimes things are thrust upon you that you have no say in, i.e., I'm in a tenure-track job at the University of Alabama. My partner finishes her PhD, gets a job in one of the top 5 programs in her area in New Orleans. So I was like, okay, we can do that. That's 4 hours. We've done that drive many, many times. And then I get the job here a few weeks later because I hadn't heard about it, or I hadn't heard back. We assumed it wasn't happening. Okay, so we'll see what happens for, we'll try the first year apart and see what happens. We knew not ideal. Her first day of work was the day Katrina hit. So she ended up becoming visiting faculty here in the fall because former interim president Scott Cowan was the president of Tulane at the time. He used to be here before then as well. What was he the head of? He was head of Weatherhead. Thank you. Yeah. So we had a connection, and then she went back, but clearly it wasn't going to be the right thing, and I could never live in New Orleans, but that's another story. So she's now here at Cleveland State. No one was expecting a hurricane, at least not like that. So sometimes there are those kinds of things where we don't really have a choice and we have to be flexible. And in our case, it did work out for the long run. But part of this job is, I feel like part of this job is you can settle, but you just don't know what's going to happen because it may not be the perfect job, or it may be the perfect job when it starts and then things change because the tenor of the department changes, or you decide, I really hate this weather, or I really would rather go somewhere else, or a parent gets ill and it's like, I need to move back to wherever it is, right? So this is a thing I always used to say to my grad students, don't let people give you a hard time saying that being in grad school isn't real life. Things keep happening. People are born, people die, people come out, people have all kinds of things happen while they're in grad school. This is a job, just like the job you're about to go to. And things will happen. And it's just, we have to learn, we have to be flexible in our lives if we can. And it's hard, but it's just something to just have to keep in mind.
I would just add though, well, now you're still at the stage of deciding where to get your job. But to me, and having a different perspective on this, I think that currently, well, I'm very happy with the situation that I'm in now. But let's say years in the future, I start realizing that I need something a little more, and I feel like it's not best for me to move given that my kids will be like in school and they have their friends and I don't want to make such a big move for them. I may be thinking about ways to improve the current environment that I'm at. Like try to mobilize resources around me, try to influence change within the institution to try and accommodate for that. And I think it has to do with what your priority is at that time. Are you just wanting to follow what your work passion is, or are you willing to sacrifice some of that for the family life? And that's definitely a personal decision, but I just wanted to offer that other perspective on how you might make a choice in the future.
Those are such great perspectives. One of the things that Dan said really harkened to, should I ask a question from here? Are you sure? Okay. I noticed you out of the corner of my eye. Sorry about that. Made me think about one of the questions on the sheet, which was about thinking about networking and informal interviewing, right? Building those networks and thinking about Scott Cowan. Before I kind of open it up for you all to answer that question, I don't know if she's watching via live stream, but I might be embarrassing our postdoc. About 4 years ago, I sat next to our current postdoctoral scholar at a benefit in Toledo. And fast forward, for an hour, and fast forward 5 years later, I offered her a position here this January, and she's a fabulous member of our team. So when you mention that, you never really know what's going to happen in those networking connections. So I love to hear, I think we all love to hear a little bit more about how you've built some of those informal networks and how it's helped your career.
All right, I have to take that one because that was tailor-made for this answer. So I'm sitting in my postdoc mentor's office. She came to my wedding. It was a year after the wedding. And she was like, so, Radhika, do you want to go live with your spouse? I came to the wedding. I was like, right. I was like, as far as I remember, it's in a different state, right? And I was like, right. And he was like, but would you like to live together? I was like, well, it's fine. Like, it's okay. We'll make it work. It's fine. But I'd rather just finish my postdoc and go on the job market instead of like interrupting my postdoc to go live with my spouse, which she was like, well, we can make both of those things happen. And she said, well, would you like to move to where my spouse happens to be a professor at Oberlin College? And she's like, how about we look for a job for you in Cleveland? I was like, right. Yeah, we could. That's an option because it's 45 minutes from Oberlin. And she said, I just happened to have done my PhD in the Department of Genetics at Cleveland. I was like, yeah, I know. And she's like, well, we can contact some people. She's like, I think there's at least 2 people there you should go work with. And we can keep your job here. We can keep the project going. She's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. She's like, give me a moment. She picks up the phone. She calls person A. They didn't answer. She picks person B. She says like 3 sentences. And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll take her. Well, good. And she's like, yeah, you have a job. You can apply. You don't need to apply. Just go say hi to them in person. They'll arrange a trip and see if it all looks good to you. If you want to do it, they're ready to host you already. I was like, you just got me a job. And that was because that's just what mentors do, right? Like we have that network that we can look for. And if I find a student who has a specific skill set and I want to place them there, I can call those people up. And if I have enough integrity and if they know who I am, they'll say, yeah, I know that person. We're all looking for people who are well-trained and coming from places we know. That gives us some confidence that it'll be okay. And if it isn't, then I'm going to call them or their integrity is at stake, right? And I think that was so amazing to me that you can move a human being from one job to the other with a phone call. Done. And I imagine that happens all the time in industry and big places. But I was amazed. I was like, this person has never even seen me. And they just said yes. And she just says, yeah, she's a senior postdoc. She has a job. She has money. She just needs a place to pipette. And this is in the Department of Genetics at Case Western. And the model organism I was moving was not even a genetic model organism. So I was like, wow, they're going to host me? And I was really amazed. And they did. And then from there, I got the current job I have because I had already been teaching in the department I now have a job in. So they had seen me in action and they were like, yeah, we'll take her too. So it worked out really well. Yeah, it's a crazy story.
All right, I'll tag. I'm trying to think which is the best one. First academic conference I ever went to. Is that right? I went to my first national conference as an undergrad. That should tell you a lot. I knew 3 people there, my undergrad mentor and one of my other undergrad profs. And then I had club level access at the hotel, which is very exciting. So it's after the business meeting, I'm sitting there and I'm chatting with these 2 people. And one of them is a professor at IU, which was one of the schools I wanted to go, I was going to apply for grad school. So I knew his name, and I might have known that he worked in the area I was interested in. And so we start up a conversation, really, really nice, and they're very, blah, 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 blah. And then at some point he says, so what department are you in? And I say, oh, I'm in the music department at, so-and-so. Oh, how long have you been a professor there? No. I'm an undergrad, right? They thought I was a tenure track professor just from sitting and they were very sweet. And so when I did apply to grad school, I had a very nice conversation with them. I ended up not going to IU, but for the next 10, 15 years, I'm in contact with these folks just by virtue of having sat there and being willing to have the conversation and being open and not being like, oh yeah, please don't talk to me because I'm not really who you think I am. And just, it never turned into anything, but that's okay. Because sometimes it's just a matter of, hey, how you doing? That kind of conversation can go any number of places. And for me, that was a really big learning experience just to see where those kinds of things can go.
I guess to give some bit of contrast, so I think I'm really bad at like networking and kind of establishing informal interviews and stuff. I think my job search experience was a kind of example of that, right? Where I did it completely cold, right? Because essentially I also kind of like, I guess I went from kind of cancer genome sciences to more infectious disease immunology. So like I didn't necessarily have any of my mentors network to try to work with. So, I mean, so that's where the whole 100 applications, 10 interviews, one offer kind of thing came from, right? So I think it's possible, but I think it can be very difficult. In contrast, I did one of these future faculty fellow workshops at University of Washington. One of the panelists that they had decided was had done a postdoc for 2 years at Harvard, and then essentially another chair just decided like, oh, we want someone like you in our department, and essentially more or less like handpicked him to come to their department. So like that to me is like the complete opposite, right? Where like if you were in the right networks, then that thing that was a 1% success rate for me can be a 100% success rate for somebody else, right? Now, in terms of kind of informal interview stuff, so I think like for me, again, because I'm extremely introverted, like networking stuff's really hard. A lot of it comes with like a feeling like I should be doing something. I think at some point in my career, I realized that like the nice thing of this job is, like everyone likes science or whatever the field is. Like it should just be an opportunity to just talk about the science or something. And I think that takes a lot of the pressure off of me in terms of like, oh, I should be career building by networking. If I instead just, view it as more as like, let's just chat about this interesting topic that's interesting to both of us, right? Then you kind of do that networking without necessarily having to go through what feels like you're doing that networking, I guess. Let's see. Oh yeah, and then another thing. Now that I have this job, I've now realized that it's not necessarily a bad thing for people that are like interesting and talented to kind of like seek out to be the person that gets sought out by people that are kind of good candidates for something, right? Like if you're at a company or something, then and you're kind of informally interviewing with somebody that's at some company that you might be interested in. Who knows? Like maybe they actually get some kind of reward for like identifying you and drawing them into the company because, they're looking for somebody that has your skills or something, right? So I think don't even necessarily even think of it as like, I guess my first example there in terms of, just treating it as a chat of like interesting topics, right? That's not looking at it directly as networking, but instead kind of you're doing that networking through a different activity. But even like the act of networking, like it's not necessarily, or doing these informal interviews, in some ways, again, to me, like as a trainee, I would see it like as like, oh, I'm being a burden. But like now that I'm on the other side, I don't even know how much I believe that anymore, right? Like I think if it's, kind of, again, like passionate people that are kind of well qualified and just trying to find, their right place, like I would even see that as like a good use of my time talking to them.
Thank you all so much. If we don't have any other questions from the audience, I thought I saw you.
So we do have a question from the audience. How do you deal with anxiety about an uncertainty of career opportunities? I believe it has a really strong effect on all aspects of your life.
Well, I deal with anxiety through having a therapist. I think that's really important, that if that's something that's pervasive through your life, not just around the job part, not that wouldn't be enough, because it certainly is. Being in therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy for me is really important. Recognizing that there are some thought patterns that I can get into that are not healthy. That is something that I'm finally, like 4 years into this, comfortable saying out loud, and recognizing that actually I'm not the only person with these issues, and it's quite common among folks in grad school and postdocs and in academia. So for me, like learning skills to be able to talk about it has been really important. And then kind of exploring different options and talking to different people in different careers. So one of the things I was going to say earlier, whenever there was a question about like academia or industry, like just talk to people in those different spaces. And if you don't know people in those, talk to your mentors, talk to us. I mean, we're clearly here because we are willing to be a resource. I have several friends in industry, and I've had a couple of the grad students in our program say like, oh wait, we're not supposed to talk about industry. Like people, our PIs won't like us or whatever. I'm like, that's nonsense. Like I will connect you with all of my industry friends if you want, because that's important for you to know that that's an option. And like, there shouldn't be this uncertainty surrounding like respect from your mentors or whatever on whatever path you take. And not everybody has, not everything is going to work out in the same time frame and timeline for everyone. I think one of the things that Kenny said that really stuck out to me was I wasn't the best candidate in everything that I applied for, but I was pretty good, right? I like that you said, I mean, we don't need to be like the best, or we need to be like pretty good. And even if we are one or the other, being the best or not, things are still not necessarily going to work out on the ideal timeline. And that's important to recognize, that there might not be anything you can do to influence that. And so learning how to deal with like that disappointment, and that anxiety is, important. But like, what do we do specifically? Personally, therapy, exercise, thinking about other things besides work, talking to people, learning their experiences. Like even just today, this panel, like learning that you were in like the record industry for a while. I mean, that's so cool, right? You just have to recognize that not every path is that like smooth transition from undergrad to grad school to postdoc to faculty, right? And that's what I did. And honestly, when I look at it on paper, it's a little bit boring.
Totally agree. And the thing I think I was going to say before is, I used to say that it was folks who, that the people, the academics I knew who were the most, let's say, troubled, they were ultimately the ones who were not connected with family. And then I realized that I have plenty of friends who are very well adjusted who don't really connect with their family. And it's basically people who lose sight of the big picture, which is that there is a big picture, right? That there are other things, whether it's therapy, hobbies, talking to friends, talking to colleagues, whatever it is, the more one isolates oneself, the harder it gets. And the echo chamber of this is the worst possible thing and there's no way out, that's where it becomes dangerous. And so whatever that path is, any number of the things we just said or others, the key is to make sure that you are aware that you're not the only person going through this. There are other people who are having similar or possibly worse experiences, and that there is always someone that you can talk to about this, either as a friend, as a therapist, as a counselor, as a mentor, whatever it might be. But the point is to stay plugged in with the community around you, whatever community you want that to be. A community of runners, a community of ceramicists, bakers, whatever it might be, or other biologists or musicologists or whatever your area is. But that really, really, really makes a huge difference, I think, in managing stress and anxiety, is just getting out of your head, because
It's a scary place.
it is a scary, mine, let's not go there.
I have to, so I talk about this also from a position of having done it myself, is that I think you have to, mental health is a piece that I think very carefully about. My mom struggles with mental health issues, and my son also now struggles with mental health issues. I would say anxiety, distinguishing the two words is between stress versus anxiety. I could save you some good therapy money bills. That you want to make sure that, yes, stress is something we can work with, all of that. Anxiety becomes debilitating. If it ends up on the debilitating side of things, you definitely want to seek help. Doesn't have to be like pharmaceutical, but definitely go speak to people, figure out what it is. I'm also a big fan of openly accepting that this is a hard job. What you're doing is a hard job. What I'm doing is a really hard job. And it can it's very stressful, but you can work through it. But anxiety is not a resource. And so it doesn't help you do better at your job per se. And if you're feeling anxious and to the point where you cannot come to work and do the work that you're doing as a postdoc or as a grad student, you definitely need support and help, and don't be afraid of speaking up. I can say that till the cows come home, but that doesn't matter. But the important thing is seek help. I strongly believe in getting therapy, but I also think that most people need coaches. I have a life coach, I have an executive coach, I have a therapist. I'm fully processed. Like, I have many people prop me up here, right? And all these people are on my payroll or on someone's payroll, and it's happening all the time for me because it takes that many different people weighing in on you to make it happen. And if you don't have family and neutral elders weighing in on you, you sometimes think it's all going to pot and who cares? And it just feels very, very demoralizing. So I'd say find yourself, paid or otherwise, get those accountability there, make sure you seek out friends and those people are seeking you out. And I think those networks will keep you propped up and you will keep it going. And don't have this vision in your head as a postdoc that I will only be happy if I have that job with this in this location at this institution, because I think that's what's probably most going to cause anxiety if you kind of pigeonhole yourself into one way of imagining yourself.
I completely agree. Great suggestions. I wouldn't wait until it's an actual diagnosis to seek help. I think catching early signs of distress or being in any stressful experience or situation is important for you to start thinking about those conversations. My recommendation, and to your point, is to seek out maybe a coach is a great example, or maybe like a mentor that you are not currently working with, not like your PI, but somebody that you had worked in the past or maybe got introduced to at a professional meeting, who is able to provide you with that objective assessment and guidance. Is something that has helped me in the past.
I just want to re-emphasize the coach thing. I was going to say that, and I'm really glad you brought it up, because having a career coach, I personally have gone to Susan Freimark, who used to be in the Floristone Mather Center for Women, multiple times. Like, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. Can you please help me? Just like, she is having a professional who can get to like the point and like the crux of what is going on. I cannot, I can't put a value on it. And I think it's important for all of us to have these conversations and to be willing to say these things, because I don't know about for all of you, but for me, none of my mentors or people I looked up to ever said therapist, career coach, life coach. You know, I think it's important to kind of bring emphasis to the space. There's one more thing I was going to say. Oh yeah, I would also agree with not waiting until it becomes a diagnosis, because I know for me personally, it became debilitating in grad school. And so then I had to be medicated, and it would have been really great if maybe I had gotten help, like cognitive behavioral therapy, before I got to a point where I was not sleeping and then therefore unable to really be productive. So keep an eye out for that kind of thing, and take care.
Other people too. If you see someone else struggling with it, if you see something,
Exactly.
say something.
Yeah,
Or tell your mentors to like help them too. You don't have to do it all yourself.
Just so folks know, Susan Freimark is available to anybody who's affiliated with the medical school on a faculty or postdoc. The Floristone Mather Center for Women offers free, and is free. At the medical school, that's free. The Floristone Mather Center for Women offers free coaching for faculty, staff, students, and postdocs, all certified coaches through the same programs, mainly for women and or gender-related issues to work. And then the graduate student office actually has certified coaches that also offer career and executive coaching. So there's a lot of different free avenues to take advantage of that on campus. Yeah, because it's not, I pay for mine now, my executive coaching, but I couldn't have afforded to pay for it when I was in my postdoctoral fellowship. So, okay. I think a really great, this may or may not be the final question. It depends how deep we get into it. But I think a lot of what you've spoken about really leads into our next question about how do you define and then create work-life balance for yourself? And I guess I want to acknowledge immediately. I know it's a process personally. So how are you currently defining and creating? I might change the question too.
I don't know. Defining it is like hard. It's a big question. I would say maybe like provide an example of how I've started to think about work-life balance. And so like, remember, I got my faculty position in July of 2020 at a time when we were all trying to figure out work-life balance, but I also wanted to make sure that I'm trying to create a system for myself so that I can build on it and learn from it. And so what happened is I started like tracking my energy level and the activities that I would do each day to figure out whether I was successful doing them at that specific time or not. And I tried to go like through multiple cycles of identifying when is best for me to do what, whether it's my own writing, checking email, following up on like articles that I wanted to review, spending time with my family, because it was like all happening at the same time. And then I was able to create a system for me to be able to accomplish everything that I needed to do for my job as well as my family. And I had to spread them throughout the day. So I knew that I needed to like spend time with my son because he was in kindergarten, but learning via Zoom. So I knew that like 10 to 12 is that time with him. So then I had to move my writing time to earlier in the day. And then like I had to shuffle things around so that it made sense to the way that I function. And it was a suggestion that one of my mentors had provided me with. Try to identify when is your peak time of working on specific tasks. And that will help you block out specific times on your calendar for specific, like various activities. Like I don't want it to be very specific to academia, but to me, writing was a big thing that I couldn't necessarily block out time on my calendar. And I had to figure out when is a good time for me to write and when am I most efficient doing that. I think that was a system that worked for me early on in the pandemic, and I had to carry it over all the way through today. Like I know that there is a specific time during the day, even though it's within the 8 to 5 window, that I have to be with my family, and then I have to just work a little extra in the evening or on a weekend, and I'm okay with that.
For me, having a supportive partner has been really key for this. So if you are not single, making sure that you're with someone who is able to help prioritize your time. My husband was a teacher for 10 years, and we realized right before the COVID school year that for our family, we couldn't have 2 careers and give our daughter the attention that we wanted to and to have the family life that we wanted. So we prioritized my career, and he now works part-time in retail. That's a kind of hard thing for me to talk about because I feel like sometimes in academia we encounter people who are just very like ivory tower mindset. And I think it's important to recognize that there are different ways for different people and different families to prioritize work and life or work and home. And I don't love the term work-life balance. I prefer like work-life harmony or work-life synergy. I know they all really mean, the same thing, but I think it's important to understand that, there are going to be times when I'm writing a grant for 14 hours a day. And yeah, it's really great that I can do that from home. But my partner understands that he will be the one with the kids. and doing all of the things. And then sometimes, I might be able to just work a half a day and I can then make up that time, right? But if you do have another person in your life, I think it's really important to understand, for them to understand, like what they're getting into, but kind of, because this, if you do, whatever route you choose, this is demanding. And so I think kind of tackling those kind of things as a team for us has been really, really important. And then being with someone that encourages you to have a hobby. We've been having this conversation at my house. I kind of giggle because my therapist told me I needed a hobby. And then my husband just last night was like, yeah, what's your hobby going to be? Like, I don't know. It used to be exercise and now I don't know. I think though that it's going to look different for different people is what I'm really trying to say. And whether that means we have a person that comes to clean our house once a month. And yes, I'm faculty now and I can afford to do that. But I don't want to spend that time away from my child, my husband, and my work, and neither does he. So that's one of the things that we financially prioritize. And there are other lots of different examples of things, grocery delivery, or just grocery pickup, which has become so much more common during COVID. I mean, there are things that we can do to help us kind of prioritize time and put effort in the spaces where we want to put that effort, and do things more efficiently.
So something I'll add to. So I completely agree with that. I think, one thing that's important to note is, I think every person's definition of what their work-life balance is, I think, can be very different. So I think my definition of a balanced work and life is going to be very different from even my wife's. And I think, it's useful to know like what works for you. And actually, I guess in that example, knowing what works for the both of us actually also helps. For example, like I don't actually find vacations very relaxing, but she does, right? So I think, like if we do take joint vacations, then doing it in such a way that it kind of benefits both of us. Or there have also been times that, like, I don't know, like she's taking a vacation with her family because, that is a part of her work-life balance that isn't necessarily part of mine. In the case of, and I think, I don't know, like, also, again, I'm going to be somewhat of an outlier. For me, like, some aspects of my work can even be part of like enjoyment, and I even consider that part of my overall work-life balance. For example, if I'm analyzing like data that is not something that's like due for a grant, it's like not due for anything, it's just literally like data that I just find enjoying to like analyze, and even if it's kind of work related, like I don't consider it a job, right? Like I'll do that in the middle of the night just for fun. But again, that's part of my kind of weird idea, not weird, but like unusual idea of what my work-life balance is, right? So I think like as you kind of figure yourself out and the things you enjoy, just like knowing what works best for you is, I think, useful. And other people have their opinions, but I think at the end of the day, knowing what works best for you is important.
For me, it's I was told by young people in my house that work-life balance, when I told them I was going to give this presentation today, they just laughed. And I was like, wow, that's really insulting. And then they were like, well, it's not a thing. You should just tell them all it's not a thing. So a riff off that is, I think for me, what the work-life balance or work-life harmony part defines is whatever it takes to be the best version of myself. And to me, I'm with him. I'm totally data magnet. I love sitting there and staring at the stuff and then thinking about what's going on. It makes me tick. If that gives me joy for that little time, it doesn't even feel like work, because I'm just like, wow, I'm peering into the cells, and I get to get a movie of like first class movie here without even paying any. Oh, well, I did pay a lot of money for it, but like it's something that gives me joy. Fine, you can do it for a few hours, but it allows me to be the best version of myself. And if that is what gives me joy, great. If working out that's on the agenda, awesome. But I think you want to see both work and life as not exclusive of each other, because we talk a lot about the WLB problem in the academic market, but I think everybody out there has it, right? Like no one person is excluded from the work-life balance scenario. So I feel like you shouldn't feel like, oh, you are special because you are going to have this work-life balance problem because you want to go into academia or you want to go into industry. I think everybody has it. You just have to navigate it with some grace. If you don't have the grace, get a coach, get them to teach you how to do it, or lean on your family members to have them teach you how to do it. The previous generation did it. We're all going to have to teach the next generation how to do it. So I think it's just about finding what allows you to be the best version of yourself. And if it means you have to put certain systems in place, do that and follow them and have accountability. Get a friend to go out and exercise with you, or make sure somebody is there to eat a meal with you once in a while so that you make sure it gets done. But I think it's just, it's a moving target too. Like the way I defined work-life balance 10 years ago is very different than I define it now.
It's also important to know how to say no, particularly on the work part. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people, particularly if you're contingent faculty, if you're a postdoc, if you're a lecturer, or what, where you're being asked to do things for the team, quote unquote, but, and in your heart of hearts, like, yeah, this would be really helpful, but this is actually not going to do anything for me other than it's just helping somebody else out with their work or whatever the circumstances may be. That is the place where it's like, you know what, I actually don't have the time to do this. And that's hard. And circumstances around that can be very tricky, can be political, but give yourself the time to think about it before you say yes. Is maybe my best advice in that, because I always like to say yes to things. Like, oh yeah, sure, I have time for that, no problem. Like, oh wait, why did I say yes? I don't really have time for that, or I want to do it, but I don't have time to do it well. And so, or something else that I said yes to is going to have to suffer, or I can't do something else. So, just take the time. It's like, is this ultimately the right thing? And it may not be writing a book or writing an article or contributing to some big project. It could be something really small. And it still takes away energy and time that you might be using to do nothing, which is a really good thing to be doing.
I would just add, like, to your examples when you were talking about analyzing data and how unusual that is, I wanted to let you know that it's not very unusual. Like, to me, I feel like there are some parts of our jobs that are very rewarding that we could delegate to other people, but sometimes we have to, like, do some of it so that we enjoy the process. Like, I know that when I'm collecting data, specifically interviewing people, I could do it on a weekend. I could do it in the evening. That gives me joy to just talk to people. And I try not to delegate all of the interviews to a research assistant because I do find that rewarding. And I don't know, I just like it.
No, I think that never goes away. So I'm also very unusual. I'm pretty senior in my job, but I probably am one of the few people I know in my network even who still pipettes at the bench. I really love doing work with my hands. I still pipette at the bench. I have my own bench. People don't put their crap on my bench because they know I get really upset. I have my own experiments. I really like doing science myself, and I don't want to ever forget how hard it is to do the science. And I tell myself, I gave it up for a couple of years and I was very miserable when I wasn't doing it, but as hard as it is, I juggle all these other things, but I still feel like my bench time is my bench time, and it's on the calendar and people can see it. It's prioritized. She's doing her bench work. Don't bother her. Even if they have a question, they won't bother me if they see me pipetting because I can only do one thing at a time. And so I feel like for me, it's a really important aspect of who I am, and I'm never defined by being, I don't think I have the ability to just be a faculty member in the office and being an administrator of the science where I just write grant proposals and grade papers. I just can't do it. It doesn't give me that much joy, although I do like it, but I still feel like my heart is at the bench and generating the data. And I don't want to forget that process of how hard it is to do that. So when students come in and they're like, oh my God, I have nothing to show for myself, I'm like, yeah, join the club. It's humbling both ways, right? And for them, it's a huge aspect to role modeling. They can see that even though I am doing what they're doing also, I think it's really helpful. So don't ever, if you have the ability to keep that going, keep it going because it'll always bring you joy.
And I'm sorry, I have to
Don't
leave.
be sorry. Keep going. Oh no, that's fine.
Yes,
I thought you were
thank you
going
for
to say
inviting
more.
me. I enjoyed our conversation, learned so much from all of you, and good luck. And if you have any follow-up questions, just feel free to email me.
Thank you so much. I was just going to say that these are all very valuable things that I have heard before in other contexts, and I feel like I need to hear them again and again. And so I hope that you all benefited from that as well. The one thing I wanted to add is that somebody once told me is often we like to tell whoever might be supervising us or making decisions about us all the great things we plan on doing. And we've got this list of 20 things we're going to do, right? And then at the end of the day, we get like 8 to 11 of them done. The 8 to 11 is really impressive. Stop telling people all the things you did not get to. Keep that for somebody who's not making a decision about your productivity. Because if you just say, I got these 3 articles out for a review, but you wanted to get 5, we don't need to know that. Those 3 articles are super impressive. So I just wanted to add that I am a big, I do this all the time. Any final thoughts for our audience on work-life balance, on building your career?
I had a couple things I'd written down. Because I don't believe that you can balance work and life, and I don't think it's a problem, or members of my household also think it's not a thing. I had some strategies to offer to the young people. I think you have to be judicious. You have to track time. Time is your most valuable resource. Track it, see how you're doing. He tracks it, I track it, I still track it. And one of the things I did, because an associate dean ended up in my office and said, I can't submit my 4th federal grant because I don't have enough space on my schedule. And he showed me the pie chart of my time. I said, oh, what a good idea. I'm going to make a pie chart of my time. So I have metricized my time into a pie chart of how I spend my time for work. It's down to the hours on what I do in every whatever. Somebody asks me to do something, I look at my pie chart and I'm like, something has to leave my pie chart in order for something else to fall, because I'm already working at full capacity. And that has been really hugely eye-opening for me. I also read the book called Subtract, which is about like people just pile things on, but then nothing ever comes off. And I just told you the entire punchline of the book. But I think that's really helpful. So my spouse calls me the meal a deal cards. I have these meal a deal cards for this concept, because even at the house, people ask me to do like 10 things. I'm like, you're welcome to take something else off my plate. Then I'll do that for you. And they do. I just put all my stuff out there for what I do at home, and somebody's like, okay, I'll do your 2 loads of laundry. Can you please register me for X, Y, and Z? Done. It's been really helpful as a strategy, both at work and at home, to have this sort of system where my department chair actually just relieved me of 3 other things, because he was like, oh, that looks really bad if I ask you to do this. And yeah, it's visible. It's right. Literally, I have meal a deal cards at my desk. If somebody wants to ask me to do something like big things, they have to like take something else off my plate. The other strategy that I use a lot is embrace technology to help you with the work-life balance. And now everybody's on board with this, but I live 2 hours away, so it's like a lot of time in the car for me. I've only been told I should do one thing at a time by my life coach, so I only drive, I don't do anything else. So make sure if there's ways of embracing technology, embrace it. If it helps you with your work-life balance, awesome. If you want to go sit in the park and take a Zoom call, do it, right? Nobody cares anymore. So that's been really helpful to me. I used to do video conferencing a lot before the COVID, but now everyone's like okay with it. So that's also really have boundaries and have silos. Like when you're at work, do work. If you're playing, play. Don't doom scroll on either location. Just do what you're doing and do it well. And the hardest thing about this job is just doing it at the best level as you can, because there's 10 other people in front and behind you who want whichever job you're looking for. But if you are grounded in yourself and you know thyself, you're going to come out ahead just fine. So I would say create those boundaries, make sure people know those boundaries, create buffers between those boundaries, and respect your time. So when you're supposed to be writing, you're supposed to be writing. You're not supposed to be doom scrolling. You're not supposed to be registering anything. You're not supposed to be looking up an article, nothing. Just sit down and do what you're supposed to do. It takes a lot of discipline, but if you want to get stuff done, that's just how you do it. And you make a list, get your executive function A game on, work down the list, move on.
You mentioned accountability more than once today, and I just want to re-emphasize that because accountability is something that has worked great for me. I found it through the Faculty Success Program and the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, NCFDD, which CASE has a membership to, and it is not only for faculty. You just need a .edu email, and I came to accountability that way, and I will actually Zoom with my accountability partner, and we will set timers for doing exactly what you just said. Just work. Like, don't talk. Don't be looking up articles. Don't be trying to answer the easy emails. Right.
No, and the internet, you can just turn off the internet, right? They have the features now on the Mac, like for focus or whatever. You can just turn it all off. Sit down and write.
And if that's what you need, I mean, that's kind of like my baseline now. I'll go back to the accountability and the like Pomodoro timers. Yeah. And if that's what I have to do to get myself back on track, which is actually what I need to do like today after this, then that's what I need to figure out what works for you.
I guess, my kind of concluding thought is, I think, the postdoc and PhD periods, I mean, they're tough times, right? Like, I think, before in our lives, like, things were more regimented or, there was school or whatever, like, but like, once you reach this stage, then, like, there are no clear, like, set of things that you're supposed to do anymore. It's much more open, and I think that is kind of hard. But, I think that's more reflective of the real adult world. So I think, it's something that's worth adjusting to. I think if you do feel like, you are kind of confused in what you're doing, I think, things like this, like knowing that resources like this exist, I think that's really useful. And then, I think the main thing I want to say about the postdoc and the PhD time is, there's a lot of kind of, I don't know, let's say like proxies of success or something. But I think the most important thing is like, it is the period of your training, right? And I think hopefully the thing you'll get out of it is that you'll emerge as a far better logical thinker, or a far better writer, like all of these skills that I think will serve you well for the rest of your life. And then, and I think, again, like things seem like they're kind of, I don't know, priorities might seem misaligned. For example, supervisors will have their grants and they want to get all these splashy papers. But at the end of the day, as a postdoc or you as a PhD student, what is most important is that you're gaining all these skills that you can only get through these training periods. And it really is a training period and not somebody trying to use you, your efforts to improve their career or whatever.
Anything, Dan? All right. Thank you all so much. Really, I learned so much. Thank you to our postdoctoral scholars and fellows that helped to organize this event. Hopefully folks will see the names in here. If anybody wants to I'm sure would be happy to talk with anyone who wanted to get in touch. And I hope you all have a good rest of your afternoon.